Hey everybody, today I'm talking about my top 10 racing board games. So these are all games where you want to be the first person to achieve a certain objective or the first person to reach a certain amount of points, and of course the more traditional race style games where you want to be the first to get from the start point to the end point before the other players. So in general, I really do enjoy racing style games. I enjoy the tension that they bring to the table, and I will say that while I like all these games, I haven't necessarily listed them overall in terms of my enjoyment of them, but more in terms of how I think that racing element of them really shines through the strongest. So I'm going to start with a quick honourable mention. So technically my number 11 is a little game called Odin's Ravens. So Odin's Ravens, a very simple two-player only game where you have these you're basically taking control of this raven, and the other person is too, and you're basically trying to climb up these cards and get back around the other side as quickly as you can before your opponent does. You're trying to match these terrain types to fly over certain spots, and you are basically manipulating these cards to try and line up all the amounts of terrain next to each other that are the same, because once you play a single card of that terrain type, you fly all over all of them in a single action. A really tense game, one that I think's got a great sense of pacing, and a very simple introductory level game that has a gorgeous production by Osprey, and I really recommend checking it out if you kind of want to introduce someone into modern board gaming. So just a quick honourable mention there with Odin's Ravens. But let's get started on the main list at number 10. So at number 10, I have Mikado. So Mikado is by one of my favourite designers, Rudiger Dorn, and this one is one of his designs that maybe haven't quite hit the heights of a lot of his other designs, but I still really do like this one. It's another very simple introductory level game that, if you're familiar with games such as Quacks of Quedlinburg, this one has some shared DNA with that, as you're drawing tokens out of a bag. But instead of this one, you're not pushing your luck and trying not to make a potion explode. You're basically trying to pull these different tokens out and then allocate them to these different tiles on the board. And once you've reached the requirement of these tiles on the board, then you can claim them for your own and then move a certain amount of spots along a track. But everybody's doing this all at the same time, so you're taking turns smashing these down, constantly trying to claim the same ones, and sometimes you're beating people to the punch while they've already allocated some resources to them, so they waste their turns, but you do get a bit of a kind of a compensation by doing that. But it's a really nice one where if you get the right points at the right time, you can give yourself little boosts, and you can acquire like wild tokens into your bag, and you can thin out all the black tokens, which are basically duds and don't achieve anything. Super simple fun, but it does have a nice forward momentum to it as you're thinning stuff out of your bag, and if you win these tiles, you're actually removing those tokens from your bag, meaning that you have like kind of less odds of drawing the ones you really need out, or you can sacrifice a whole turn to take all the tokens back into your bag and start from scratch again. But yeah, I really do like this one. It's so simple, very family weight game, and I think maybe this one didn't quite hit the popularity of a lot of other games because I think the simplicity and the kind of inviting nature of the game doesn't quite match up with the aesthetics. It looks like a very stuffy Euro-style game, but it really isn't. It's a very family-friendly racing-style game with a lot of tension, and I think it's a lot of fun. So that is Mikado. At number 9, I have Kashgar, Merchants of the Silk Road. So this one is a game where you are racing to get to a certain amount of points, and you're doing that by building an engine of cards. So you basically start with 3 columns of cards, and on your turn, you're picking to activate one of the cards at the front of these columns and then picking that card to the back. And these cards are going to do things such as giving you resources or even letting you fulfill contracts which are in the middle of the table, which of course will give you your victory points. But I really do like the way that the race element of this game to get to those points and the engine building tie hand in hand. Do you want to go for these big extravagant engines where you've got to fly for a lot of cars and acquire more and more cars, or do you want to make very short, succinct engines where you know exactly what you're doing and just go through those motions? And I love the kind of way you can line up all your different caravans. So when you activate this column, it will rotate around, and then you can activate this one, which will trigger this one, and so on. Very, very clever game. And if you like games like Splendor, which was another consideration for this list, then I really recommend checking out Kashgar, Merchants of the Silk Road. And yeah, that real tension to get those contracts done and to race for those points does shine through very strongly, in my opinion. And this was definitely straight in the forefront of my mind when constructing this list. So number 9, Kashgar, Merchants of the Silk Road. At number 8, I have another Euro style game. So don't worry, they do change from Euros. This one is Rajas of the Ganges. So this might not initially appear like a racing style game. It's a very kind of gateway plus medium light worker placement style game where instead of collecting resources as you normally would, you're actually using dice. And then you're using dice to do lots of different things, such as building these tiles out. I'm trying to match up these roads to get money and stuff. But what makes this a really strong race game, in my opinion, is of course the winning condition. So unlike most Euro games, you're not trying to be the first to get, or after a certain set amount of rounds, you not want to be the one with the most victory points. This one, you are racing to connect your victory points with your coins, because they both take place on the same track, one starting from the end, one starting from the beginning, and you're basically trying to make them come together and then hit and connect with one another. So you can go for a real kind of economic strategy and try and get as much money as you can, or you can go for a real points-based kind of strategy and try to get the most points to reach your coins. But I love that struggle of trying to keep them building and building and building, and of course you're spending money as you go, making it go back down. But I do really love that end game mechanism, and the fact that a Euro game merges with a race game so well. I think it feels very fresh, and considering there's a lot of these kind of worker placement medium light style games, I think this one is one of the best ones. And a big part of that for me is the fact that it is a race game. It makes it stand out, and on top of all that, it's a beautiful looking game, very smooth, and one that I've to be honest, I've not really heard much negative feedback on Rajas of the Ganges at all, and I agree, because it's a fantastic game, and again, that race element is what really makes it stand out for me. At number 7, I have something very light. This is an older game called Can't Stop. So I really enjoy push your luck style games. This one is just that, as you might guess from the title of the game. So this one, you are rolling a bunch of 4 dice, and then you are putting them in pairs, and then you are basically choosing those numbers, and then you're moving up a track. And you've got on this board, you've got tracks from 2 all the way up to 12, corresponding to the pairs of dice that you can put together. And then for each time you roll those, you are going to climb up a track and climb up a track and climb up a track. But eventually you can either choose to kind of save your place and cement your place on these tracks, or you can keep pushing your luck and pushing your luck. But when you don't roll one of those numbers that you've allocated, then you are going to fall right back to where you were before and potentially lose out completely. But I love the fact that each player is racing for the same things here, or potentially the same things, and as soon as someone gets to that top, then they're going to lock out everybody else who's already climbing on that track, and then basically eliminate that option for the other people to climb up. And the end game trigger is when one person has completed at least 3 of these tracks. So yeah, you've got that race and tension, and I think that mixed with the push your luck makes it so tense and so exciting, because if you know you're really falling behind, then you know you've got to go to hell with it. Let's just keep pushing my luck and keep going, and you can find yourself flying up these tracks and defying the odds and pipping your opponents at the post. So I really do like the that tension and the race of this push your luck game. An older game, I think this dates back 30, 40 years, but it still feels fun. It's a classic, simple mechanically, and anybody can enjoy this one. That is Can't Stop. At number 6, I have another game that you probably wouldn't initially think it's a racing style game, but this is Res Arcana. So Res Arcana is a card-driven game and an engine building style game, as you're trying to place these cards down and activate these cards to get you resources in different ways. And I love the way all these cards work together and synergize with one another, and you can do these really cool combinations where one card gets you this resource and this one converts it into this resource, all with the aim of trying to get to a certain amount of victory points. So I love the way you've got to tailor this engine. You've got to fight for these tiles in the middle of the board. You've got to try and get points in any way you can, and it really does have that tension and that drive of wanting to beat your opponents, because sometimes you can see them running away with things, and then you start to get back towards into the fight by getting all these triggering all these things next to each other. And it is all about how you use those cards as efficiently as you can, without wastage or anything like that. And it's really really satisfying engine building game with that constant tension of wanting to be the first to reach that amount of points. So yeah, this one is a great game that does a lot with a little, and I think it's probably one of the best card driven games I've played in a few years. So that is Res Arcana. Definitely want to check out if you like your clever but simple engine building games with a lot of combinations and things, but still ultimately with that race element being the backbone of the game. At number 5, I have a more traditional style racing game, one that you would instantly know is a racing game. This one is Flamme Rouge. So Flamme Rouge is a game based on the Tour de France, so it's a cycling race. And this one is so unique. It's probably one of the best, most elegant and thematic games I've ever played. So this one, you have a pair of cyclists. You've got a roller and you've got a sprinter. So you've got the sprinter who's really good at making fast bursts, but his lower cards in his deck don't move so fast. And you've got a roller which is a bit more kind of consistent. And the idea is that you of course want to be the first to cross the finish line. But rather than being a more gung-ho style race where everyone's always spamming their biggest cards, because this is a card-driven game where you're basically playing cards and exhausting those cards when you play them. But you want to be very careful about when and where you play these games or play these cards, because if you ever end up with your cyclists in front of these packs of cyclists, then you are going to end up taking exhaustion cards into your deck, meaning that when you draw those cards from your deck, you're only going to move 2 at a time, which is not good at all. And the more you find yourself in front getting those exhaustion cards, you're going to find yourself slipping further and further behind. So you'll be playing very tactically, just slipping just behind the winner and making sure that they're taking the brunt of the exhaustion, and also capitalizing on slipstreaming. So one of the coolest mechanisms I've seen in any game, to be honest, is this slipstreaming mechanism where if some player moves a certain amount of spaces and there's only one gap between a cyclist and the one in front of it, then they automatically shift up one, meaning that you can be very productive about how you use these cards and get a lot more mileage out of them. And on top of all of that, you've got to be careful when you want to play cards when moving up hills, because you're capped on the movement you can. So playing a very high card when you're going uphill is not a good idea, because again, more wasted movement. But moving downhill, if you play your smaller cards, you get a boost because you always move a minimum movement. So very clever game, one where you want to time things just right and know when to start, throwing caution to the wind and start pushing for that race, and knowing when to sit back. And one of the strangest games in terms of being a race game, because it's not a game again you want to push for the finish line from start to finish. It's all about that timing and when to play those cards most efficiently. So a very fun gateway level game, family weight game, and especially if you're into cycling, then I couldn't recommend Flamme Rouge enough. At number 4, I have Cartagena. So Cartagena, one of the simplest games on this earth. This is so simple, with quite a cool theme, I suppose, as you are this bunch of pirates that are in prison, and the idea is you want to get your bunch of 6 pirates through this secret tunnel and onto the escape boats before the other players do. And the way you do that is very simple. So on these hit tracks getting into that finish line is going to be a bunch of symbols, and you're going to have a hand of cards, and you're going to be playing these cards to move to the next available symbol of that type. However, when somebody is landing on a symbol and you play another card of that type, then you're going to skip past that one and onto the next one. And you can use that to your advantage quite heavily, but of course at the same time, the other players are doing the same thing. So you can actually inadvertently help your opponents skip past you and get a lot of use out of their cards and fly halfway across the board. But this one also has a really cool tension of you're going to run out of cards really quickly, and in order to get more cards, you're going to have to take one of your pirates and move them back to the next available bunch of pirates sitting somewhere, and then you get an amount of cards depending on how many pirates are there, and potentially have to fall further back. One of the most accessible games, just you can teach this game in literally 30 seconds, but the choices here are surprising. There's a surprising amount of nuance and things you can do in terms of getting the most mileage out of your cards, knowing when to play them, knowing when to hold on to them. And the kind of momentum of this game is quite strange as well, because initially you'll find yourself getting, traveling really far with these cards, but as more people escape the prison, then the cards are really going to make you really chunder along and start just not moving very far at all, meaning that the tension of wanting to get your people out really does ramp up as the game goes on. Fantastic game, so simple, but it does feel like a bit of a classic. That is Cartagena. I really recommend that one, and having a lot of fun with it at the moment. At number 3, I have Fast Sloths. So Fast Sloths, a really fascinating game actually, one that I think is really unique. So this one, you are taking the role of a sloth, and the idea is that you're trying to visit all these different trees before the other players do. However, as you'd imagine, being a sloth, you can't move at all. So you have zero movement. You're just a sack of potatoes, just not doing anything. And you've got to manipulate all the other animals on this big board in order to do the heavy work for you. So you've got elephants, and you've got giraffes, and you've got ants, and crocodiles, and goats and stuff. And they all move in different ways and have different abilities and what they can do. So, for example, the elephants can pick you up from a few hexes away, or the crocodiles are really good at moving through the water, and the goats are good at moving through mountains. And you've got ants which kind of chain together and move you across by pushing you across the top of them. And it's all about lining up all these different animals to pick the most efficient routes and to basically use them as well as you can to visit all these different locations. A super fun game, and one that I think is a real novelty, but a novelty that feels classic. It's so streamlined. There's no bloat in this game whatsoever, and it's just all about mapping those turns the most efficiently as you can. But I love the fact that the other animals on the board are they're not yours. They're completely passive pieces, and just because you wanted to use a certain animal, it doesn't mean that the other people don't want to move them too. So at the same time, you're kind of jockeying for the same animals, meaning that people are either directly or kind of deliberately or indirectly affecting you as you plan these routes. Such a fun game. Again, another wonderful family plus weight game, simple to teach, but has a lot of decisions here, and that race element is so strong in Fast Sloths, and it's a real original and fresh concept as well. So Fast Sloths, a strong number 3 for me. At number 2, I have Istanbul. Istanbul, another really good Dawn game, as I mentioned, being the designer of Mercado at number 10. This one is a game where you want to be the first to achieve a number of gems. You want to be the first to either reach 5 or 6 gems, or rubies in this game, depending on the player count. And you get those rubies in lots of different ways, such as collecting money and then trading it in, or collecting all these resources and trading them in, or even doing things such as increasing your wheelbarrow and stuff. And this game, you have this big grid of tiles, and you have a player piece with a bunch of merchants tokens, and you're moving 1 or 2 spaces in an orthogonal direction, and you are depositing one of your merchants at that spot. And then you're going to activate that spot, which, as I said, is going to do a lot of different things. And the idea is that you want to then visit the different spots that you're going to cash these in. But when you deposit these workers, it means that you can't, your stack's getting thinner, meaning that when you go somewhere else, you're going to drop another one off, and then drop another one off. And eventually you're going to find yourself running out of these merchants, meaning that you're going to have to backtrack on yourself to pick them back up. And this is a really interesting kind of route building style game using that mechanism. But again, the backbone of the game, the tension of the game, is that you want to plan these routes efficiently in order to get those rubies as quickly as you can. Because again, once you start going to these objectives and start cashing all your resources in, the kind of the ratio in which you get these returns get worse and worse and worse. So, initially it's going to be quite cheap to get a ruby, and then the next person to trade in money is going to be slightly more expensive, and then more expensive again, and more expensive again for the following players. So it does have that cool tension of wanting to get everywhere first, and knowing what you're going to do, what routes you're going to take, and how you're going to get those rubies as quickly as you can. So I think it's one of my favourite games anyway. I think it's a tremendous game, a very versatile game that anybody can enjoy, but still having a lot of depth here. The expansions add even more depth in and more complexity, and I think this is an absolute triumph of a game, and mainly because of that race mechanism. And finally, at number 1, I have the Oracle of Delphi. So this is a Steffenfeld game. If you're a fan of my channel or a regular viewer of my channel, then you're pretty aware that I'm a huge Steffenfeld fan. Oracle of Delphi, I think, is a really underrated game by him, one that isn't talked about so much. But it does have a lot of shared DNA with one of his most popular games, The Castles of Burgundy. And what I mean by that is that it's a dice-driven style game, as you're rolling a cluster of dice and then using them in all different ways, shapes, forms, all different things. But in the Oracle of Delphi, you want to be the first person to achieve all these kind of legendary quests and tasks, such as slaying all these mythical beasts, collecting these statues and depositing them somewhere else, all these cool things. But the way you do everything is based on those dice. So the dice are going to let you move hexes by sailing across the seas. They're going to let you fight monsters. You're charging powers up, which can kind of let you teleport across the board, or slay monsters with no risk, and all these different things. And I love the way that you have to think, I'm going to go here, then I'm going to go here. On the route, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to drop the statue off here. And all this time, you're getting more and more powers, more engine building. You're building these god powers as well, and all of it just comes together in this amazing package. So many things going on, but that focus and the driving force behind the game is that, and you're always looking over your shoulder about what the other people are doing and wanting to get all those tasks done before the other people do. And sometimes I love the way that you and the other opponents want to go for the exact same statue, and there's only one available there, and you are just racing neck and neck to get to that spot, and the other person's going to get completely shut out and have to divert somewhere else to get that objective done. So much fun. One of the best Steffenfeld games out there, and in fact one of my favourite games of all time, and certainly my favourite racing game. Just so different, so fresh, unique, very Euro-y, but still so satisfying and so fun. So that concludes my top 10 racing board games. I hope you've enjoyed this list. I've really enjoyed talking about these games because there's such a diverse list here, from very simple ones such as Count Stop up to your pretty involved games like the Oracle of Delphi. So yeah, generally really love racing games, and hopefully there's something on here that's caught your attention, and maybe you want to try check these games out. So if you have enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. And for everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.